Good morning and welcome to the Independent Planning Commission's public hearing into the State Significant Development application for the Chain Valley Colliery Consolidation Project, SSD-17017460. I am speaking to you from the Awabakal land and I acknowledge the traditional owners of all the countries from which we're meeting today, and I pay my respect to their elders, past and present, and to the elders from other communities who may be participating today. My name is Neil Menzies and I'm the chair of this commission panel. Joining me are my fellow commissioners Juliette Grant and Bronwyn Evans. No conflicts of interest have been identified in relation to our determination of this development application. We also have Mr. Robert White as counsel assisting the Commission at this public hearing. Mr. White will call on registered speakers to give their submissions and may also ask speakers questions to assist the panel in understanding their submissions. We have a limited and specific role at the end of the planning process. We decide if an application should go ahead and, if so, on what conditions. We consider the department's assessment report, the application, your written and oral submissions and other materials that the planning law requires us to consider. All of these materials are either already publicly available or will be made available on our website. In making a decision in this case, the Commission must obey all relevant laws and consider all applicable policies and the public interest. We're also obliged to consider public submissions. That's the purpose of today. We want to hear what you think about the merits of this application. This is not a forum for submissions on whether you like or approve of the applicant, the laws we must obey, or the policies we must consider. The application has already been assessed by the department on our behalf. Many of you have already participated in the department's process, and we thank you for your participation. There is no need to repeat your previous submissions. They are all available to us for consideration. The applicant and the department have considered all your submissions and taken them into account in the application and assessment and the recommended conditions. I particularly want to stress this last piece. Even if your submission today objects to the application, we encourage you to tell us whether any of your concerns could be addressed either wholly or in part by imposition of conditions. Your consideration of alternatives does not in any way compromise your submission. It enables the panel to consider all options. Counsel assisting the Commission will now outline how this public hearing will be run.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert White, and as per the Chair's introduction, I will be counsel assisting the Commission at this public hearing. I'm going to now just outline briefly how the public hearing is going to be run. First of all, we're going to hear from the applicant. We will then hear from the Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure on the findings of its whole of government assessment of the application currently before the Commission. We will then proceed to hear from the registered speakers. Whilst we hope and endeavour to stick to our scheduled, our published schedule, this will be dependent on the registered speakers being ready to present at their allocated time, and we have some people presenting online, so I hope you're listening to this and are ready to go ahead at your suggested time. I'm going to introduce each speaker when it's their turn to present to the panel, and everyone has been advised in advance how long they have to speak, and the schedule has been put on the IPC website. As Professor Menzies has advised, the panel has read and considered your previous submissions made in writing and has also considered all the submissions made during the department's exhibition process. A bell will sound when a speaker has 1 minute remaining, and then a second bell will sound when a speaker's time has expired, and I do encourage everyone to keep to the allotted time frames. To ensure everyone receives their fair share of time, I will enforce these timekeeping rules. Extensions may be granted on a case-by-case basis by the panel chair. However, in the interest of fairness to other registered speakers, an extension of time may not be granted. If you have a copy of your speaking notes or any additional material to support your presentation this morning, we would appreciate it if you would provide a copy to the Commission, and these will then be published on the IPC's website. Please note, any information given to the Commission may be made public, as I say, because it's going to be published on the website. The Commission's privacy statement governs its approach to managing your information and is also available on the IPC website. The exits from the venue in the case of emergency are located to the, I think, behind the speakers. There's one to the left and there's one immediately behind as well. And I believe there's one to the front and side there. And the bathrooms are located outside the doors at the back of the hall and to the right in that direction. At the conclusion of the public hearing, we will hear from the applicant to answer any questions that the panel may have or respond to any issues raised during the public hearing. So that's the way in which this morning will run. And it's now time to call our first speaker. And the first speaker this morning is Mr. Cornford, who is a representative of the applicant, Delta Power and Energy. So, Mr. Cornford.
Good morning, Commissioners, Council Assisting, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Joshua Cornford. I'm the mine manager of Chain Valley Colliery, and I'm here today speaking in support of the Chain Valley Colliery Consolidation project. Next slide. By way of background, underground coal mining has been occurring in the Southern Lake Quarry district for over 100 years now. Chain Valley and Mannering Colliery was formerly known as YE State Colliery. They both opened and commenced underground operations in the early 1960s, and they were two distinct mines. Throughout that time, they've supplied coal directly to Vales Point Power Station. In 2017, the mines were linked to underground, and from that time, notwithstanding the two separate consents, the mine has been operated as a single operation. Because of the historical separation of those two operations, we are in a situation where we have those two separate consents. All the coal that we mine now is brought to the surface and handled at Mannering Colliery site and then transported by overland conveyor to Vales Point Power Station. Just by way of some numbers, in 2025, last year, the mine employed around 340 people and we supplied 1.07 million tonnes to Vales Point Power Station in support of reliable baseload energy generation for New South Wales. The plan on the right there shows some of the historic mine workings in the district, including the existing Chain Valley and Mannering workings, and to the north of us is the existing Myuna Colliery as well. Next slide. These two plans here show the current approved mining areas. So the plan on the left shows the Chain Valley Colliery consent boundary, and the different colours there represent the different subsidence zones contained within that consent. So Zone A, which is shown by the blue, there, we are permitted negligible subsidence, 20 mils. The purple area there is our Zone B subsidence zone, which is under the lake, and our subsidence restrictions there are 780 mils. The Mannering consent on the right there, the entirety of that is at the Zone A subsidence levels, so 20 mils, whether it's under the lake or foreshore and land. Next slide. By way of a summary of the project, so the project involves the consolidation of those two existing approvals for Chain Valley and Mannering into a single contemporary consent. And it extends the life of the mine from the end of 2027 to the end of 2029. It actually reduces the combined extraction limit between the two consents from 3.2 million tonnes to 2.8 million tonnes, but it aligns the coal handling from the Mannering site to that 2.8 million tonne limit. It doesn't change the approved coal handling limit from the Chain Valley site, which remains at 1.5 million tonnes per annum. It doesn't change the existing road transport limits, so 660,000 tonnes for export customers and 180,000 tonnes for domestic customers. I would just add that that road transport hasn't been utilised during the time of Delta's ownership. All coal handled from the Mannering site will continue to be transported to the Vales Point Power Station via existing conveyor systems as well. So importantly, the project doesn't seek any changes to the existing approved mining areas or the surface facilities. The plan on the right there shows the combined project area and the boundaries associated with that. The Zone B subsidence from the Chain Valley's existing consent is extended into the Mannering consent in a small portion in that northwestern area there under Lake Macquarie. So that's transferring the existing conditions that we currently use at Chain Valley to an equivalent area in the Mannering Colliery consent. Next slide. So as part of the process, an environmental impact statement was developed and a detailed analysis of the potential environmental and social impacts of the project did occur. Now we're fortunate, the projects and the mines have a long operational history and the project's essentially a continuation of those operations. So the potential environmental and social impacts are pretty well understood and they were further informed through that EIS process. Now Delta acknowledges that there has been concerns raised through that consultation process and some of those particularly relate to subsidence, noise, air quality, water quality, and the greenhouse gas impacts. Now, given the 15 minutes, I don't have time to go through all those matters in detail, but the EIS does address those matters. In general, the project's potential environmental and social impacts are associated with a longer period of operation, rather than any change in magnitude of operation or the scope of operation itself, relative to the existing operation or the existing mine as it currently stands. Next slide. Just to dive a bit deeper into the greenhouse gas emissions. So a lot of the submissions to the project did raise concerns that the project would be incompatible with Australia's international obligations as well as federal and state net zero goals. So irrespective of this project, greenhouse gas emissions in New South Wales will continue to decline as coal-fired generators leave the national electricity market over the coming decades. Vales Point is going to continue to operate, but Vales Point, and through this transition, Vales Point will remain an important part of New South Wales baseload energy generation, and Chain Valley will support that. Importantly, the overwhelming majority of the incremental emissions associated with the project, 85% of them will be Scope 3 emissions associated with the combustion of the coal. Those emissions are going to occur irrespective of whether this project is approved or not. Importantly, the project's aligned with the state government's strategic statement on coal exploration and mining. That statement supports the responsible or reasonable development of coal resources during the transition, recognises existing industry investment by continuing to consider responsible applications to extend the life of current coal mines, recognises that ending or reducing New South Wales thermal coal production while there's a strong global demand is not going to have any major impact on global carbon emissions, and it takes a responsible approach to the global transition to a low carbon future. Next slide. Now, it's important to call out as well what the project doesn't do. So the project doesn't alter the existing nature of the current operations at Chain Valley as they are occurring today. It doesn't change the existing approved mining areas. It doesn't change the surface disturbance footprint. There's going to be no additional direct impacts to native flora or fauna. It doesn't remove any existing environmental standards, safeguards, or thresholds. In fact, it actually increases them. It doesn't involve the construction of additional surface facilities or infrastructure, and it doesn't make any changes to existing approved road use. Now, a lot of the submissions did talk about the power station as well, and it's important to touch on that. The project doesn't extend or alter the life of the power station in any way, and it doesn't alter its ongoing operations. The project is not going to influence the amount of coal burnt at that power station and the emissions from that power station. If the project's not approved, Vales Point will source coal from other suppliers. That will create greater social and environmental impacts, whether they be associated with transport and noise, or potentially the high sulphur coal that will be sourced from the Hunter Valley to be used at that power station. The project doesn't impact ash dam management. The power station is going to continue to operate to support the energy transition by providing reliable baseload generation, irrespective of this project outcome. The project will not result in any material changes to environmental and social impacts other than those associated with extending the project for 2 years. Now, what the project does do, the project consolidates the consent conditions for 2 operations into a single contemporary consent. It improves regulation and it simplifies the administration both for Delta and the government agencies that regulate it. The project will maintain secure employment for over 330 local people. These are local people in the community, local well-paid jobs that are working here. It will provide ongoing economic benefit at a local, regional and state level. It'll allow the efficient resource recovery and greater flexibility in mine planning without any material change in the environmental and social impacts. The project will continue coal supply security to Vales Point Power Station. It mitigates against coal supply risks, be they associated with international price shocks or logistical constraints. It ensures the transport-related impacts associated with coal supply from other sources is minimised. And it continues to ensure Delta will contribute to the energy transition through the provision of reliable baseload generation to New South Wales. In summing up, Chain Valley and Mannering have been operating since the early 1960s. They've been operating as separate operations and in 2017 have been joined and operated as a single mine since then. The project is a minor increase in the life of the operation that's associated with the extended life of Vales Point. Now, when this project was submitted, the life of Vales Point was 29, and since that time that it's been under assessment, Vales Point have spoken about continuing operation beyond 29. But this project is about extending the life of the mine to 2029. It consolidates existing consents into a single contemporary consent. That's got benefits. It updates updated and contemporary conditions for environmental management, and it simplifies the administrative arrangements both for Delta and the government agencies that administer it. The project will not result in any material changes to environmental and social impacts other than those associated with extending the life of that operation by 2 years. Extending the life of that mine provides extended employment and economic benefits for local, regional and state communities, and it continues the coal supply security for Vales Point, and that benefits New South Wales in terms of reliable baseload generation during the energy transition. Thank you very much.
Is Miss Jessie Evans on behalf of the Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure.
Good morning and thank you, Council Assistant Panel. My name is Jessie Evans and I am the Director of Energy and Resource Assessments at the Department of Housing, Planning and Infrastructure. I would like to start today by thanking the Commission for giving us the opportunity to brief you on this project. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to begin by providing some context for the Chain Valley Consolidation Project and the Department's assessment of it. I'd want to do that by providing an overview of our role and providing a whole of government evaluation of the project. So the project is classified as a state significant development under Section 4.36 of the Environmental Planning and Assessment Act. So throughout public exhibition of this project, more than 50 unique submissions by way of objection were received. So as such, and in accordance with section 4.5 of the Act, the New South Wales Independent Planning Commission is the determining authority for this project. So the aim of the department's evaluation is to inform the Commission as the consent authority and to assist in its need to conclude if the project is in the public interest. Next slide, please. So the department exhibited the environmental impact statement from the 18th of November 2022 to the 16th of December 2022. And during that exhibition period, we received 180 submissions from the public, 7 from special interest groups and 173 from individuals. We also received a submission from Lake Macquarie City Council supporting the project and advice from 11 state government agencies. Of the 180 submissions, 133 objected to the project, 45 supported, and 2 provided comment. Next slide, please. So this slide graphically shows the key issues raised in the public submissions. The dominant issue raised in submissions were concerns about air quality impacts and associated human health impacts, cumulative air quality impacts with Vales Point Power Station, and emissions from coal transport. Closely following these were concerns about climate change impacts and the additional greenhouse gas emissions from the project, in addition to impacts to Australia's climate change commitments. Impacts to water resources predominantly focused on impacts of the project on Lake Macquarie. All submissions were carefully considered in the department's evaluation of the project, including the applicant's response to these submissions as well. I'd now like to briefly discuss the impacts of the projects and the department's evaluation. Next slide, please. So to do that, just a little bit of context, underground mining at Chain Valley and Mannering did commence in the 1960s, and over this time, coal extraction has occurred through a variety of methods, including board and pillar, continuous miner, and mini well extraction. The area does have extensive historical mine workings across a variety of coal seams, and this amplifies the complexity of subsidence management in the area. So to provide some further background context, I just want to do a quick overview of the approved mining operations at Chain Valley and Mannering. Next slide, please. The current approved mining operations at Chain Valley are shown on this figure here. There are 2 existing approved subsidence limits for Chain Valley. Zone A, where there is a maximum of 20 mils and is along the high water mark subsidence barrier and seagrass protection barrier, is shown on blue in this figure. And this subsidence limit has historically been achieved by pillar extraction and mini wall mining only in those areas. The second zone is Zone B. This area has a maximum subsidence limit of 780 mils in all the remaining approved areas. This is achieved by a continuous mining method using board and pillar extraction, in addition to mini wall mining methods. Next slide, please. So the currently approved mining operations at Mannering Colliery are shown on this figure here. There is one subsidence limit here, and that is 20 mils. And that's achieved by first workings only using herringbone board and pillar configuration. Next slide, please. So now I'm just going to quickly touch on the project and the changes proposed in relation to underground mining and subsidence. So firstly, this project seeks to consolidate the existing approved operations and consents at Chain Valley and Mannering into one single operation. So the project would extend the life of the mining operations at these 2 coal mines by 2 years until 2029. The project seeks to continue mining in the approved areas with existing mining methods, in addition to undertaking secondary workings in part of the approved Mannering Colliery area beneath Lake Macquarie. And that's the area shown in red on this figure here. Next slide, please. So throughout our evaluation, the department found that ongoing mining in Zone A areas would result in no adverse impacts to surface infrastructure, buildings, or changes in elevation of foreshore areas. The existing high water barrier mark seagrass protection barriers would continue to remain and be enforced. As a result, the department has found that ongoing mining in Zone A would not result in adverse impacts to seagrass or Bethnic communities. The department recognised that the assessment of subsidence for this project is a key issue and it is highly complex. And for this reason, we engaged the Independent Expert Advisory Panel for Mining to conduct a comprehensive review of the subsidence assessment. The panel recommended replacing the current numerical subsidence limits with a contemporary subsidence performance measure. The panel argued that performance criteria would achieve the same objectives as those intended to be achieved by the now legacy issue of specifying an extremely low level of permissible subsidence, for example, the 20 mil and the 780 mil. The department agreed that this approach would result in improved environmental outcome and regulation. Next slide, please. So in relation to mining within the Zone B areas, the department's evaluation found that the subsidence impacts can be adequately managed. The applicant has demonstrated that the proposed workings and the mining method to be used can be designed to ensure that 780 mils of subsidence is not exceeded and that impacts to the natural environment and built features are acceptable. The proposed panel layout, both extraction widths and barrier pillar widths, would result in a maximum substance of 475 mils, which is below the currently approved 780 mils, and was therefore considered acceptable by the department. There are no known jetties or cable infrastructure in the extended extraction area. Further, no additional impacts to seagrass beds, foreshore areas, onshore or nearshore beat filters, or public safety are anticipated from secondary extraction within the extended Zone B area. In relation to Zone P, the panel did recommend a staged approval of extraction plans for second workings based on predicted versus measured performance. And given the diverse local geological environment, the panel noted that a staged approval approach for extraction plans is appropriate and that it would help reduce instability risks and allow for adaptive mine planning and to provide contingency should any unexpected or unpredicted levels of subsidence occur. Next slide, please. The panel also provided a series of recommendations which have all been adopted by the department, and these included requiring geological properties and thicknesses to be investigated for each set of extraction panels, the overall number of panels in any location be limited to no more than 2 without the inclusion of a more substantial barrier, and also enhanced monitoring and auditing, including geotechnical investigations and annual independent reviews. So the department agreed with the panel and adopted these recommendations in our evaluation, and should the Commission determine to approve the project, they are also presented in our recommended conditions of consent. The department accepts that the application of subsidence control zones and the recommended conditions of consent would avoid subsidence impacts on the lake foreshore and seagrass beds. Further, the recommended conditions of consent are considered suitable to inform the Commission to provide an adequate and appropriate level of protection for other natural features and the built environment. I now just want to quickly talk to noise and vibration. So next slide, please. Noise has historically been an issue for nearby sensitive receivers, and while noise complaints have declined following extensive mitigation programs at the sites, noise does remain a concern for the community. The project would result in minimal changes to the existing noise environment, with the exception of extending operations for an additional 2 years. Noise modelling predicts compliance at most sensitive receivers with limited exceedances under worst-case scenarios. The applicant and the EPA have worked together to derive contemporary and consistent noise limits for the combined operations. And should the Commission determine to approve the projects, the limits are conservative and would actually result in a positive outcome for the community. Next slide, please. The applicant has committed to continue to implement existing noise controls, as well as implement additional controls to further reduce noise impacts associated with the project. So mitigation measures, including closure of new coal handling infrastructure, strict haulage restriction, and consolidated noise limits, would reduce impacts across the 2 sites. Should the Commission determine to approve the project, the department has recommended consolidated and updated operational noise limits across the combined consent, a requirement for all reasonable and feasible mitigation on plant and equipment, and continuation of attended monitoring and reporting to ensure compliance. I'm just going to quickly speak to air quality, so next slide, please. Air quality impacts due to the project are predicted to remain below relevant standards. Cumulative impacts with the Vales Point Power Station are also not expected to exceed relevant thresholds. So should the Commission determine to approve the project, the department has recommended a requirement for all feasible and reasonable steps to minimise potential air quality impacts and continuation of monitoring and reporting to ensure compliance for air quality. Next slide, please. In terms of greenhouse gas emissions, the project would generate approximately 13 million tonnes of CO2 equivalent emissions associated with the additional 2 years of coal extraction. Most of these emissions would be Scope 3 emissions associated with the combustion of coal by the end users, in this case, the Vales Power Point Station. The New South Wales EPA, as the lead regulatory authority for greenhouse gas emissions in New South Wales, noted that the emissions predicted to be generated by the project are consistent with the New South Wales emissions reduction targets, and this was particularly given the project's direct linkages to the power station and to the fact that mining operations would cease in 2029. The applicant will be required to prepare a climate change mitigation and adaptation plan to demonstrate how they can avoid and mitigate their Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions and exposure to climate risk. The department accepts and acknowledges that Chain Valley is identified as one of the state's gaseous mines. However, this should also be considered against the short timeframe of the proposal and the comparatively minor amount of new coal in that Zone B extraction area, and do that in light of what is currently permitted to be extracted and against other projects in the state. Next slide, please. The department recognised in our evaluation that greenhouse gas emissions from the project would contribute to climate change, where there is a net increase in global emissions. This would contribute to the climate change impacts in the locality. Community submissions also highlighted concerns about these risks and their social and economic consequences. Similar to subsidence, the Independent Expert Advisory Panel for Mining was requested to conduct a comprehensive independent review of the greenhouse gas assessment for the project. The panel agreed that the greatest potential for reducing emissions for this project would be better realised in controlling legacy emissions from previously extracted areas. Next slide, please. The panel provided a series of recommendations, including the preparation and implementation of a greenhouse gas mitigation plan. The plan would be required to identify and implement all reasonable and feasible measures to minimise Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, including the adoption of energy-efficient mining equipment and practices, investigation of renewable energy procurement where feasible, improvements to ventilation and methane management, and annual reporting of emissions performance. The department has adopted the recommendations from the panel in its our assessment and also in the recommended conditions of consent for consideration by the Commission. And should the Commission determine to approve the project, the applicant would be required to more accurately map the project's greenhouse gas emissions footprint and provide greater details and priorities on further mitigation measures to be implemented for the life of the project. Next slide, please. Finally, I would like to recognise other environmental impacts associated with the project. The department has assessed the impacts of the project on other values and issues, including water resources, traffic and transport, biodiversity, social and economic, Aboriginal cultural heritage, historic heritage, and rehabilitation. These are all outlined in detail in our assessment report, which is publicly available. Impacts on water quality and biodiversity, including the seagrass and Bethnic communities, are expected to be minor and manageable under existing monitoring and management frameworks, which have been carried over into the recommended conditions of consent. And should the Commission determine to approve the project, the implementation of reasonable and feasible mitigation measures can be applied to manage the residual impact of the project via strict conditions of consent. Slide, please. Overall, our evaluation determined that the project would secure coal supply to the Vales Point Power Station, supporting energy security during the state's transition to renewable energy. The project would consolidate multiple historic approvals into a single contemporary consent, improving regulatory certainty, transparency, and compliance. All key environmental impacts have been considered, including subsidence, noise, greenhouse gas, air quality, water quality, biodiversity, and heritage. And should the Commission determine to approve the project, we have provided conditions to address these matters. Community, agency, and independent expert submissions have been considered and addressed through strengthened performance measures, independent expert reviews, and transparent monitoring and reporting requirements. All relevant strategies, policies, and guidelines have been considered, including the strategic planning context and the state and national climate change policies. And lastly, the project would retain over 300 jobs across the region, supporting the Lake Macquarie and Central Coast economies. The department is confident that the project has been thoroughly evaluated to inform the Commission as the consent authority, supported with the additional information and technical expert reviews that can be read in conjunction with our assessment report. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your time this morning.
Evans. The next speaker is Mr. Jeff Meal. Sorry. No.
I particularly note the number of pieces of advice the department sought on the way through. It did extend the time that it took to do the review, but it provided us with a great deal of insight into some of the risks, and in some instances, small but really important changes to what the application was. I remain very interested in the Scope 1 emissions. So you noted, and we understand that this is a mine that is particularly gassy. There's a lot of methane relative to coal. And the independent expert panel provided some advice. So Josh, a heads up, I want to ask at the end of the meeting for some insight from the company what your options are to reduce methane emissions, because this will be evaluated subsequent to us making a determination. So it would help us to understand what the options are that you would be looking at.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jessie, not really a question to you,
that's
but
okay.
salient to
Heads up. Yeah.
give a heads up.
I was going to point section for anyone who is interested in what some of the current mitigation options are that the applicant has committed to looking into is section 4.6.43 of our assessment report.
You're not going to get off that lightly because Juliet does have questions.
Okay,
for
no, that's
you.
fine.
Thanks.
Answer. Yeah.
Thanks, Jessie. Hopefully this isn't difficult. You and also Josh had talked about the fact that this is going to provide a contemporary performance-based set of conditions with improved outcomes. Is that reflective of the approach being taken by the department in other coal mine assessments? So, my question is to understand whether or not we actually know and understand the outcomes of that approach, or is this a new way of doing business?
It's not new, but it's obviously newer than the existing consents that they've got, which I would consider to be almost legacy consents. So it came out of originally the Southern Coalfield Inquiry, the one way back to that. I'll have to get the date of that. Sorry, I can't remember off the top of my head. But in that inquiry, there was a clear recommendation to shift to environmental focused performance measures and outcomes rather than arbitrary numbers. And from there, it has started to be implemented across consents across the state. And other things that have changed from these existing two consents to a more contemporary one is the rehabilitation reforms across New South Wales as well. So they'll be operating under contemporary rehabilitation reforms, which has been done in conjunction with New South Wales Resources and the Resources Regulator. We're still in a little bit of a transition period with the greenhouse gas emissions, but we have put in a recommendation for a greenhouse gas management plan and mitigation plan, but they will also be required to do what's called the CMAP, the Climate Change and Mitigation and Adaptation Plan, under the EPA's process as well. So there's a couple of different aspects where it's more contemporary, subsidence being one, rehab being another, greenhouse gas being another, and also the noise limits under this one have been done under new policies and guidelines as well, and are much more contemporary and have clear guidance for how they should be measured and in compliance enforced.
Thank you.
Any others?
You're right now, Jess.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to have a 5-minute break now. So if you want to use the facilities or do anything, we shall be back shortly. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We're ready to resume. The next speaker is Mr. Jeff Meal, and he's on the telephone, I believe. Mr. Meal, can you hear us? Mr. Meal, can you hear us?
Hello? Hello?
Can you hear us?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
Have you got my slides up?
Yes, we can see your slides. Thank you, Mr. Meal. Can I just indicate that the IPC has received some submissions from you this morning, and these will be considered by the panel and published on the IPC website. So, Mr. Meal, if you could go ahead with your 5-minute presentation, please.
Okay, certainly. Okay, my name is Jeff Mile. I live in Lithgow. I thank the Commission for the opportunity to speak here today. My presentation highlights scientific evidence and data on the consequences of continuing to burn carbon-based substances, including fossil fuel. Burning more carbon-based substances is civilization suicide. Extraction and burning of coal from the Chain Valley Colliery Consolidation project will contribute towards civilization collapse. I object to this project. Next slide, please. 1.5 degrees C global warming is here and now. Reveal first graph, please, and reveal text. The 3-year running mean for the global mean surface air temperature anomaly relative to the 1850 to 1900 reference baseline is now more than plus 1.5 degrees C for the Copernicus ERA5 dataset. Reveal text, please. This is likely now the hottest period on Earth since about the last 120,000 years, when human civilization and agriculture didn't exist. Reveal second graph, please, and reveal text. The long-term multi-decadal global warming level is now above plus 1.4 degrees C. Reveal the text. If the current warming trend continues, then global warming would reach the multi-decadal plus 1.5 degrees C anomaly threshold within the next 3 years. Next slide, please. Global warming has recently accelerated. Reveal graph, please. Global warming has accelerated, reveal the text box, from 0.18 degrees C per decade during the period 1970 to 2010 to 0.30 degrees C per decade since 2000 to 0.041 degrees C per decade since 2015 per the GIST data set. Reveal purple text. Reveal black text. The annual global mean surface air temperature anomaly for reveal the next year 2023 was 0.145 degrees C. For year 2024, it was plus 1.56 degrees C. Last year, it was 2025, it was plus 1.46 degrees C. Climate scientist James Hansen and colleagues suggest, reveal text, the year 2027 annual mean is likely to be around plus 1.7 degrees C. Reveal arrows. The longer term plus 2 degrees C anomaly threshold is likely to be crossed sometime in the early 2040s or perhaps sooner in the late 2030s. Next slide, please. Global atmospheric CO2 has exceeded 426 parts per million. The daily global atmospheric CO2 concentrations has now exceeded 426 parts per million. Reveal graph and first bullet point. Planet Earth has not had an atmospheric CO2 concentration this high, reveal second bullet point, since the Pliocene epoch, where it was 2 to 3 degrees warmer than pre-industrial age. Reveal third bullet point. Global sea level ranged from 10 to more than 22 metres higher in the Pliocene epoch compared with today. Next slide, please. Can humanity part the planet safely? Reveal table between 1.5 and 2 degrees Celsius. Reveal first bullet point. If you look back in Earth's history, based on empirical evidence, there are two possible alternatives, either a Pliocene or a Miocene-like climate. Reveal second bullet point. With the same boundary condition, humanity could either have a situation where human civilization may simply not exist in a Miocene-like climate, or we might somehow adapt to a Pliocene-like climate. Reveal third bullet point. Will our current greenhouse gas emissions path lead us to a climate similar to the one 15 million years ago, or just 3 million years ago? Burning more carbon-based substances will accelerate global warming faster, which may then be impossible to halt to avoid civilization collapse. Next slide, please. The Earth's energy imbalance, reveal graph, based on satellite data, reveal first bullet point, indicates more energy is entering the planet system than leading to a net accumulation of heat and thus ongoing planetary warming. Reveal second bullet point. The EI now has an energy equivalence of about 11.2 Hiroshima magnitude nuclear bomb detonations per second.
Mr. Mile,
Yes.
it's Mr. Whitehead, the counsel assisting. You've had your 5 minutes. Is there much more that you wish to say? I'll ask the chair of the panel if he would like to give you any more time. Could I ask how much more time you would like, please?
It's just a few more minutes, please.
Well, how much do you estimate?
Another 3.5.
No. Could you come to the most salient points, please, Mr. Meal?
All right. If you look at the next slide, human cost of global warming. So if you go to that slide, and if you pull up the animation, this shows as the planet continues to warm further, then more locations are likely to be exposed to mean annual temperature greater than 29 degrees C, as indicated by the expanding purple area. This means that billions of people could be living in areas that are too hot for humans to comfortably or safely live. Global warming is already disrupting ecosystems. It is disrupting human health and livelihood, food security and our water supply. It is disrupting economic growth. So if you approve this project, you are contributing to facilitating civilization collapse. That's my point.
Thank you very much, Mr. Marl, and rest assured, please, that the panel has your written submissions.
And thank you, Mr. Mile. Let me assure you the panel are very, very well versed in this material. It's one of the areas that I, as a scientist, work in. And it was useful for you today to bring it to the forefront of our attention. I'm sure everyone in the room is sensitive to this as an issue.
All right, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Stephen Galilee from the New South Wales Minerals Council, who I believe is attending via video conference this morning. Mr. Galilee, can you hear us? Yes, we can see you.
I can, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Galilee. Could I ask you to commence your presentation, please?
Yes, thank you very much. And I'm assuming you can hear me as well?
We can, thank you.
Good. And I do apologise for not being able to be there in person today. So I thought it would be useful to the commissioners, through you, Council Assisting, to provide some advice in relation to the industry level trends that we're seeing in relation to coal mining and mining more generally in New South Wales, the local impacts that that's having in the vicinity of the proponents project, some of the economic considerations that we see there, some trends in domestic energy security, as well as some thoughts in relation to managing some of the workforce impacts that we're likely to see in the coal industry going forward. If I could just go to, we're on the title slide. As CEO of the Minerals Council, just a little bit about the Minerals Council. We represent almost all of the coal producer companies in New South Wales and almost all of the all metals mining companies in New South Wales. We don't have 100% coverage, but we're probably in the vicinity of about 90% across the industry. So the economic statistics and data that we gather in our economic surveys are quite accurate in relation to the dollars being spent by the industry in certain ways in certain parts of the state. And I wanted to share some of that data with the panel as well today to provide some context for the way some of these decisions are being posed. Can we just go to the next slide, please? To give you an idea of the industry itself from a sort of bird's eye perspective, these numbers do move around a little from time to time, but not that much. And I'm sure the Commission is aware of the number of quarries we have in New South Wales. We have 55 operating mines generally. There's 38 coal mines and about 17 metals mines. The coal mines, as most of you would be aware, are divided about 2/3 thermal coal and 1/3 metallurgical coal, but there is a combination of coals produced at different operations sometimes as well. From an industry perspective, our metal sector is where we're seeing growth in new mines. The number of coal mines is relatively stable at the moment, but it has fallen in the time that I've been in this role. And of course, we have critical minerals, rare earths, and other very much sought after commodities in New South Wales, as in many other parts of the world. But we are, an industry that is looking to maximise the opportunities there. And I know that there is a critical minerals strategy at the New South Wales government level that supports that. If we could go to the next slide, please. In terms of some trends for the coal industry that we've seen in the recent past, and going back a little bit further, the next slide, I believe, will show our share of global coal production. This includes our domestic and our export coal. New South Wales accounts for around 2% of global coal production. So we are a relatively small producer on the global coal production scale. But it obviously has a big footprint here in New South Wales in some parts of the state. If we could go to the next slide, we'll see, as I referred to earlier, when I started in this role back in early 2012, there were about 60 coal mines across New South Wales in operation, and that's obviously fallen, as you can see from the data. Since then, it's been a relatively stable number of around 40 for the last 7 or 8 years. But that's those 20 coal mine that fall in number of operating coal mines happened partly as a response to a significant global commodity sector downturn in the middle of the last decade, which did hit coal as well as a lot of other commodities. And there was a reduction in the number of operating coal mines. Then high-cost mines were closed or put into care and maintenance. Some operations were combined, and we've seen that trend over time. In terms of what that's meant for the coal sector more generally at a higher level, if we go to the next slide, we'll see over that same period that we've had a fall in the number of operating mines, the overall level of coal production across the sector has increased and then been relatively steady at those levels. The chart shows coal export volumes. That represents probably about 85% of our coal production in New South Wales, with the remainder being the domestic coal production. That this project is obviously a part of that energy supply system. So if you consider that most of our coal is being exported, you get a good idea of the trends of production over time and that it's been relatively stable. I guess the factor that I do like to point out here is that we're producing more coal with fewer mines, and if we go to the next slide, we're also doing it and employing more people. These numbers here are from our economic survey that we conduct annually, and a few other charts use that data as well. We've asked our member companies how much they spend in New South Wales, where they spend it, how many people they support in jobs directly or through subcontracting, and how many businesses they do business with, and we can get data over time. This number includes metals mining jobs as well. About 3/4 of those columns would generally be coal jobs, and the specific coal production job data that we have over time, which I don't have a chart on, but it shows the number of coal mining jobs at about 25,000 in New South Wales in 2012. It fell significantly in response to that commodity downturn that I mentioned earlier, and was probably below 20,000 at one point in the middle of the last decade, and it's now back to around 25,000 again. So we have fewer mines, we are producing coal, more coal efficiently, and we're also supporting at least, if not the same number of people that we had when we had 60 mines operating in New South Wales. Next slide, please. Some economic trends in relation to the data that I referred to through the survey. If we go to the next slide, you'll see we've actually just released the results earlier this week of the latest survey, which was for the last financial year. And this slide represents an aggregation of those results. We have had some very good years recently in terms of the level of direct spending by mining member companies in New South Wales. It has partly increased because the coal industry is paying higher royalties to the government since the increase in royalties a few years ago, but there's been increases in the amount of money that the industry is spending through, member companies are spending, and also the number of jobs. The number of jobs is the highest we're seeing now through that survey in the 14 or 15 years we've been doing the survey. And again, that includes around 7,000 metals mining jobs, but it is predominantly coal. And you can see from the chart, hopefully, the gross regional product figures that is generated by that spending in those particular regions across New South Wales. I think it's around 26% in the Hunter. So that's that footprint I referred to earlier, with that 2% of global coal production. It's a quarter of the Hunter economy generally with that spending. And in the Illawarra, I think it's just below 10%. In the Central West, 15 or 16%, which is a combination of coal and metals mining project spending and so on. If you could go to the next slide, please. This is the results of our survey for the local government areas of Lake Macquarie and the Central Coast. So we are able to get this data down to a granular level. I believe this is the level of spend. This is the job numbers for the industry across that period of time. So it's relatively stable, and that's probably because the jobs in that area are linked to the domestic coal market, and that domestic coal demand has fallen. The domestic coal-fired power demand has fallen slightly time, as I'll show later, but it has been relatively stable in recent years. You can see the jobs across those two LGAs there. If we go to the next slide, I think we'll see the businesses, the supplier businesses again. These are the businesses that our member companies operating in that area have told us that they do business with, or they are businesses that may do business with mines further afield, but they're predominantly going to be local suppliers in the Hunter. And you can see relatively stable numbers again, just reinforcing the stability that the economic contribution is in that area from mining is having at times when other industries may be fluctuating. We go to the next slide. I think it might be the spending, and you can see an increase in the last few years, and there are various reasons for that. It can be related to some capital investment in the context of some of the mining projects that the panel or the department has considered, or other things, but you can see stable but increasing in terms of the local economic contribution just across those two local government areas. The next slide, I think, is a summary more of the economic benefits of the project, if we could go to that. And I'm sure that commissioners are familiar with most of these numbers from the proponents' submissions. But it is, we're just worth noting out again, the 650 local mining supplier businesses, that's data that's come from our survey there, and there's obviously jobs involved in those businesses as well. And some of those businesses will be heavily reliant on the sector and on spending from mines operating nearby or further afield. Others may just supply the sandwiches from time to time, but there certainly is a large number of local businesses out there that are part of that supply chain in one way or another. The next few slides, I just wanted to talk about some industry-wide trends in relation to emissions. If you could go to the next slide, I think that's the emissions trends. Obviously, the emissions in relation to the specific project are a matter for careful consideration, but I do want to put that in the context of what the industry has been doing more generally, because these matters are quite sensitive and they do get a lot of attention in a policy sense as well. If we could go to the next slide here. There we go. This is New South Wales government data and Commonwealth data, just to show the proportion of New South Wales emissions that are being generated by coal mines, the Scope 1 emissions. And I know that in relation to this project, there's the Scope 3 emissions here as well. But in the context of the Scope 1 emissions from the coal industry, we're about 13% based on the most recent available data. Now, obviously, as you can see in the chart, there are other sectors that are higher emitters, but we still recognise that 13% of emissions is a factor which requires us to make a contribution alongside everybody else, which we do, because if we go to the next slide, we have data from the Commonwealth through the safeguard mechanism now, real data, and we have other inputs to that data, which it allows us to demonstrate that there has been a 28% fall in the New South Wales coal sector's emissions since 2005 compared to the state average of 25%. So some of that's obviously related to mines closing and the types of mines that are closing, but noting that we are still producing the same amount of coal and employing the same number of people to be able to reduce our emissions faster than the state average over that same period of time. But we believe is an achievement. There's obviously more work to do. There's technology that's being deployed, practices that have been changed, more efficient production methods, all those things as well. And there are some significant technological opportunities going forward that our industry is engaged with the EPA and other agencies about in a regulatory and a policy sense right now. The next slide should show from a New South Wales government's own. This is from a New South Wales government document. It's a bit of a complicated slide. I do apologise for that. But the point that I wanted to highlight in relation to this slide is that the black line at the bottom is actual emissions, and then the dotted black line is the expectation of emissions under the safeguard mechanism at Commonwealth level for the New South Wales coal sector. And you can see on that trajectory under emissions that the industry is required to make under the Commonwealth arrangements will reduce our industry's emissions by 50% by 2030, which is consistent with the New South Wales government's legislated target. So those reductions are happening anyway, and we're obviously well into the safeguard mechanism by now as an industry, and one of the few industries to actually be almost entirely covered by the safeguard mechanism in New South Wales. About 95% of coal mining in New South Wales is covered by that safeguard mechanism. A few more slides. I know we've got a little bit of time left only. The next few slides, just to come back to that issue about energy security. We can go to the next slide here. It's just worth noting that what we've seen from an industry perspective, and we're focused on export as well as the domestic market. Can we go to the next slide, please? We have seen here in Australia, as commissioners I'm sure are probably well aware, a trend for short-term extensions of coal-fired power stations in our domestic energy markets in some form or another, obviously across the East Coast. And I just want to reassure people that we're not proposing a coal-fired power station on Kangaroo Island there. It's a graphic representation of Victoria, so let's not concern ourselves about that. But it is a trend there in relation to coal-fired power stations extending, and there has been some global trend in relation to that as well in some parts of the US.
Mr. Galilee,
Yes.
it's Robert White here. You've had your 15 minutes. Is there much more that you wish to say? And I'll ask the chair if you can have an extension.
There are 2 more slides.
All right. Yes. Please go ahead then.
Thank you. I do apologise for going over time. If we could just go to the next slide. The last 2 are very closely related, so they won't take very long. Just as I referred to earlier in relation to energy security in New South Wales, you can see that the coal consumption levels in the domestic market have been relatively stable. I mean, they've fallen over time, but there's still 20 million tonnes of domestic coal being consumed in the market right now. The next slide, and my final slide, just shows the share of coal-fired power in our energy generation profile in New South Wales. And again, it has fallen over time from over 90% to around 60%. But 60% is still a significant import into our domestic energy generation capacity, and it's something that we think should be taken into account in relation to matters pertaining to the domestic coal market as well. That concludes my presentation. I do thank the Chair for his generosity in giving me an extension of time.
Thank you, Mr. Galley. There are some questions, I think.
Thank you very much for that presentation. Lots of good and interesting material in there. I was particularly interested in the 28% reduction in Scope 1 emissions. And the context of my interest is that I recognise that this is a mine that has a lot of methane production, one of our gassier mines. I wondered, amongst that 28% reduction, how much of that is better management of fugitive emissions of methane?
Last year, we estimate there was around 4 million tonnes of abatement, of actual on-site abatement. I'm not sure what percentage that would translate into, but it's a number that we could provide if that's requested. It is. We're also, as I think I referred to, we've been in a process of consultation with the New South Wales EPA in relation to further regulatory proposals for abatement generally and emissions reductions generally, but there's also a strong focus on methane abatement as well. So I can get you that number if you like, but it's something that I don't have on hand.
Yeah, sure. No, I wouldn't expect you to, Stephen. And if after discussion the panel need the number, we'll let you know in writing. We would like to hear, I'm not quite sure how to cast this question, the methods of abatement, but if you could speculate on what methods of abatement might be relevant to this type of underground mine that we're looking at.
Yeah, look, I'm not entirely familiar with the technical aspects of this operation. I do understand that in the context of mines, it's a gassy mine, but that is not uncommon for underground operations to be gassy. I mean, they are generally regarded as more gassy. We have Illawarra mines underground predominantly that are more gassy as well. And there's obviously some in that area. There are a range of different technological applications that are undertaken in relation to that, whether it be drainage or other things or flaring. We've got a pilot project from an industry perspective at Appin in relation to a VAM system that the government is supporting. So it is a front of mind issue for the government in a technical sense, and there's obviously safeguard mechanism arrangements in place that have an impact on that as well. Although I know you're talking about methane more generally rather than emissions. So look, again, there are examples we could provide if they are requested, and these are examples we've provided in the context of our discussions with the EPA as well.
Yep. Thank you. Robert, I think we're okay to go.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Galley.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Dr. Merlene Thrift from, I think, her own medical practice and from the organisation Future Sooner.
Good morning, commissioners, honoured elders and guests, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dr. Merlene Thrift. I was into my 50th year of medical practice when I retired back in 2022. Within a few weeks, members of Future Sooner developed a report that has been presented to the Public Health Unit and the EPA, and which has been ignored by both parties. It was in relation to emissions from the coal-fired power stations, And thank you, Mr. Galilee, for telling me that there are approximately 200 people on the Central Coast who are responsible over a prolonged period of time for the death of approximately 150 people per year. This is based on the Australian Bureau of Statistics data and has never been refuted by either the EPA, the Environment Protection Authority, or by the public health units of Sydney, Central Coast and Hunter, New England. Out of that report, I would just like to show a picture from Greenpeace, which shows roughly a black boomerang area of maximum pollution over our state in relation to multiple emissions from the coal-fired power stations. This is also supported by the EPA's own graph. And Future Sooner has presented to Parliament last year in March untold stories, in the back half of which is a lot of technical data in relation to the reports that we have presented to Parliament. Over the period of my practice, I have treated adults with up to 3 at a time dying of brain tumours. In the area were also 2 other children who were dying of brain tumours. We know that there is an increase in head and neck tumours, and I diagnosed one man who had a large ulcer on the side of his tongue, which was a cancer and required excision. What I am saying is my own experience. I want you to multiply that by the number of GPs who are working and the medical areas working on the Central Coast. I have also treated people who are non-smokers, non-drinkers, but have died about 20 years after living beside coal-fired power stations and the trains going past, which absolutely saturated their house with coal-fired emissions. There is a study that is available on Published Medicine by Livingston et al. In 2024, which has shown that PM 2.5 particles enter the mother through the lung into the circulation, cross the placenta, and can be picked up in the fetus. Now, in the fetus, it can alter the DNA in the cells, which increases the rate of abnormalities, and it also alters the DNA in the mitochondria, which is the power packs, the energy batteries for each cell. Thank you. I wish to also point out that there's an increased incidence of not only lung cancer, there's cardiovascular disease, there's bowel cancer, there's kidney cancers, pancreatic cancers, and bladder cancers, and kidney cancers. And I wish to say that the coal burning industry is detrimental to the health and well-being of our society long term. We are going to be catching up with the emissions of NOx, SOx, heavy metals and PM particles over the next 20 years by extending this licence. Thank you.
Doctor, before you leave, not a question but a request of you. Would you be able to supply the Commission with copies of, correct, yeah, it would be very useful to us and it would be uploaded.
Mr. Gary Blaschke, and I will be very happy to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. Gary Blaschke, also from Future Sooner.
Right, thank you, Commissioners. for the opportunity to speak today. I have just given the staff all the figures on all the cancers and respiratory issues in every suburb surrounding this particular area. So you'll be getting a copy of that. But I do question why we're going through the motions when it seems like the Independent Planning Commission has already granted, subject to 4 conditions, this development consent dated 2025. Now, this is a public document, anybody can get it. It's certainly showing that it was simply designed by the Department of Planning to exerting pressure and trying to convince the IPC with their outcome of this project, and furthermore, being fraudulent and an illegal document. It should not have come out prior to the hearing here today.
Happy to see it in due course, but can I reassure you and everyone else who's listening and here that the IPC has not yet granted development consent for the project. In fact, that is the very purpose why we are here. The IPC is to determine whether or not to grant development consent.
All I'm saying is that the public can get hold of this, and it actually said that you have granted the consent.
Well, I don't know where that's
well,
come
I'll
from.
give you a copy.
Thank you very much.
Righto. Further to this document, we've got fraud in the same conditions
No,
in the
Mr. Glashke, sorry, I'm really going to have to interrupt you here because the purpose of today's meeting is to consider the merits of a particular development application.
Well, we're not speaking about the negatives, only the positives.
No, the merits, when I talk about the merits, what that means is whether or not the pros and cons of a particular project. That is what the IPC and the 3 panel members are here to adjudicate on. It's not going to be helpful for their assessment and determination for there to be allegations made about fraud on the part of government agencies or the IPC itself. So if I could just ask you to confine your submissions, please, to why you say the project should not be approved.
Well, to start with, it certainly has not been proven to be in the public interest in any manner whatsoever. But I'll give you a quick rundown of Future Sooner. We're a localised community health group advocating for the number of cancers and acute respiratory disorder patients in suburbs surrounding the site of coal mining, coal burning, power stations and their monstrous ash dams. We have conducted a citizens' inquiry and we're going to supply you with a copy of that report. Had the United Nations visit the region at their request, held many meetings with the New South Wales EPA directors, sat before several government inquiries. I sit on 2 committees at the moment with the government, with New South Wales Health. We have conducted several ghost wipes on the roofs of regional homes and found 12 highly toxic substances draining into our water tanks. We have also met with 7 state and federal members of parliament on the coast who have chosen to ignore the facts. Reading the many responses from government departments on the consolidation plan, which is basically an expansion plan, we are shocked to think that each predominantly have no concerns with the application. Having the Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure simply flicking it to the Commission to make that decision, I just find that unbelievable. New South Wales Subsidence Advisory understands that the proposal will not result in additional planned subsidence impacts other than what is allowed under the existing approval and consents. What's been allowed to subside legally? So that's what we're asking the question. The New South Wales Department of Climate Change, Energy and Environment has determined that the proposed developments is not likely to have any significant impacts on biodiversity values. So seemingly they think that there may be some impacts, but just not significant or catastrophic. What happens if something does occur? Who takes the responsibility? And it's only a matter of time before subsidence does impact on the region. Where did the community go to if something like that happens? Do they go to the department, the Premier, Delta, or the Mine Subsidence Board? Because the Mine Subsidence Board has now declared none of this region as a mine subsidence area. They lifted it for other political reasons. New South Wales EPA are satisfied impact on air quality, odour, ground and surface water impacts have been adequately addressed. But that's the same as with the fish kill as well that we're waiting for the findings of. The National Parks and Wildlife Service state there are expected to be no new additional impacts to the SCA beyond those already approved. I'd like to know who's approved these impacts. It's just mind-boggling. New South Wales Resources Regulator advises that it has no specific comment regarding rehabilitation matters in relation to the proposal. The Honorary Penny Sharp MLC grants land ownership consent to Greater Energy Proprietary Limited, trading as Delta Coal, before the findings of this commission. I just find that outstanding. But to top it all off, DPI Fisheries has no objection to the proposed Chain Valley Consolidation project and sent a 4-line message, not on a letterhead, and failed to actually sign it. So that's the Department of Fisheries, especially when we're waiting for the answers to the fish kill. Future Sooner believes that this proposal has not been proven to be in the public interest, with most departments having some form of reservation. This is the same company, Delta, which continues to receive clean-up notices for breaching their licences, and only 2 weeks ago failed to turn up with the appropriate paperwork for sentencing at the Land Environment Court for their 2 massive fish kills. How can you, as an independent planning commission, trust such a company that simply can't get their act together? When regional cancers and respiratory health issues have reached 102% above the Australian average for head and neck cancers, oral cancers have reached 83% above the Australian average, liver 73%, and asthma 15.4% of each of the populations of the small townships surrounding the area. Ghost wipes recently conducted by William Roberts lawyers for Future Sooner found that there were 12 different toxic heavy metals falling on homes in the region and into our water tanks and onto our vegetable gardens. Lead being 28 times greater than the controlled comparison wipes in Sydney. Chromium was 15 times greater, nickel 12 times greater, arsenic 4 times greater, and the list just keeps going for the 12. Birdie Housing Estate in Lake Marmora consists of 32 homes, with 24 of them having a resident with some form of cancer or a respiratory issue. 24 homes out of 32. The EPA only on Tuesday, the 10th of February, told Future Sooner through a Teams meeting the reason for these toxic chemicals falling on our homes, such as lead, was due to the increase in vehicle movements in the region. But if they had done their homework, they would have found out that it has been illegal to use lead in petrol since 2002, 24 years ago. Chromium, arsenic, nickel, mercury are all associated and can be found in coal mining and the burning of coal. Future Sooner recommends that the Independent Planning Panel refuses the application on the grounds of inadequate and nil human health study impacts. The plan states that the 2-year extension would maximise the proportion of coal burnt at Vales Point Power Station with secondary workings to expand the extent of the approval underground mining works located beneath Lake Macquarie. Currently, Vales Point Ash Dam consists of 30 million tonnes of toxic coal ash. Both collieries, if approved, will produce 2.8 million tonnes of coal ash annually. 2 more years will add a further 5.6 million tonnes, and until its proposed closure in 2033, a further 8 years, it could produce 44.8 million tonnes, more than what already exists in the Vales Point Ash Dam. Yet the New South Wales government does not have a remediation plan for the mines or the coal ash dams. This consolidation plan admits to such issues as air quality, potential further subsidence, up to 78 centimetres in the lake and 20 centimetres on the foreshore, impacting on man-made structures, and I'm assuming that includes homes, infrastructure and service facilities. I asked the Commission, would they be happy for the potential of their home sinking 20 centimetres or living next to the lake and it subsiding 780 millimetres? Further impacts with greenhouse gases, impacts and surface water and local creeks. It's all written in their report. The plan admits to further impacts on the lake and its biodiversity, seagrasses and benthic organisms. Doesn't leave much left when you really start looking at the environment. How can such a destructive proposal be simply approved by at least 10 government departments? It is simply a disgrace. Until the New South Wales Coal Ash and Health Community Advisory Committee has completed their current health risk assessment as recommended by the New South Wales Government, and that proposal addresses how Delta intend to mitigate the human health impacts which are absent in this plan. Not mention whatsoever the impacts on humans. Future Sooner rejects every part of this plan and suggests that the Commission do also, as the plan has failed to protect human health, the environment, and has not demonstrated it is in the public interest. Can it be demonstrated to the community that the process today is not some form of ploy or racket, especially when we read this document, and simply tick some government and industry boxes? As documentation on the development consent states that the Independent Planning Commission has approved the development application subject to those 4 conditions, if it cannot demonstrate Future Sooner's hopes that the Independent Planning Commission investigate the issue further on legal grounds, as it certainly does not pass the pub test. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blaschke.
Thank you for your presentation and thank you all for
Supplying the data to us. I'm a scientist, I like numbers, so
yeah.
That's great. I just wanted to note that the Commission panel spent yesterday having a look around your beautiful area here. We did visit the site, but in addition, we took the time to drive around and, and stand in front of some of the vulnerable receiver sites, and so we do have a context to interpret what you're telling us in. So
I was speaking to staff regarding your tour, asked if I could come with you and show you what we see as local residents. We are looking and speaking to residents that have unusual amounts of cancer. I've been battling cancer, 3 separate cancers for the last 5 years. I was given 4 years to live when I was first diagnosed. I'm a surfer. I don't smoke, I don't drink, and I asked my oncologist, how the hell do you get 3 separate cancers? And he said, 10 years ago, we wouldn't have come across it. Now we're getting it as a normal procedure for oncology. So,
good. Thank you, Gary.
thank you.
The next speaker is Miss Jackie Pearson from the Community Environment Network.
I represent the Community Environment Network, the peak environmental group on the Central Coast and Lake Macquarie. CEN has been a strong advocate for ecological sustainable development in this region for almost 30 years. We've heard today that there will be no additional direct impacts to native flora and fauna. We've heard from the department that any impacts will be minor and manageable, and from the proponent that there will be no changes to the approved area. Then we've heard about secondary extraction, and we've heard about the extension of subsidence into the Mannering Colliery. And then we heard also about one way of handling fugitive emissions would be drainage, so particularly methane. So as a member of this community and someone with 40 years of background in public interest journalism, including senior editorial positions at Choice Magazine and the Australian Financial Review, my test was always that if a proponent could not explain the risks of what they were about to put into the marketplace, onto the consumer in terms that Auntie Shirley living in Chain Valley could understand, then I wouldn't quote them. And when it comes to this proposal, I believe as a member of this community that it should be refused on its merits for lacking environmental merit and posing an irrefutable, although unquantified and unqualified, risk of environmental harm. When it comes to the colliery's impacts on this region's biodiversity, we as the public and you as consent authority have been left in the dark. Now, one of the recent projects that the Community Environment Network participated in was called the Barrington to Hawkesbury Climate Alliance. And what that group did was overlay biodiversity risks from mining, land clearing, agriculture and other industry with current rates of global warming. And what that major research project indicated was that hundreds of species of flora and fauna are at risk of regional extinction in this area here where we sit today by 2070. And I'm happy to provide you with that resource. So unfortunately, the proponent here has been given a bit of a get out of jail free card under the Biodiversity Conservation Act 2016 because it's been granted a biodiversity development assessment report waiver. Now, we've heard from the proponent and the department that this application is about bringing approvals and consent conditions and monitoring into the contemporary way of the world. But it seems to me that that BDAR waiver is a real black hole in terms of what we do and don't know about the contemporary implications of this application on species. So without a BDAR, how can we be certain of the biodiversity impacts of the application? How can you tick the procedural fairness box when your understanding of the project's potential for environmental harm is basically based on a wink and a nod from a couple of bureaucrats in Sydney? So the project is located, oh no, seriously, 1 minute. Okay, Lake Macquarie is Australia's largest coastal saltwater lake. It offers critical refuge to threatened and migratory species. And you don't know the contemporary impact of this project on those species because you don't have that biodiversity assessment report. The lake's extensive seagrasses and salt marsh are indispensable to ecological health. And we know that mining coal causes turbidity and salinity, which poses risks to many of the EECs, the endangered ecological communities that I've listed in this presentation today. We also have to question the proponent's willingness to fulfil the environmental stewardship that accompanies the authority authority to keep mining under the lake. This company was prosecuted for causing 2 mass fish kills in Lake Macquarie in 2022. And the judgment, may I please have an extension of 1 minute?
Just a minute, yep.
Yep. So the judgment, I'd like to read just a couple of quotes from Justice Pritchard. She said it was a faulty valve within the chlorine dosing plant that released concentrated bleach into IE Bay, and that Delta failed to properly maintain that valve. And she said it was a fundamental breakdown in the defendant's environmental safeguard systems, and that licensees are entrusted with stewardship of the natural environment. And that trust is betrayed when basic maintenance protocols are neglected. So I'll just conclude. The New South Wales DPI actually didn't make a recommendation, but it did draft some conditions of consent, just in case you decide to rule in favour of the applicant. And within those conditions of consent, there was a definition of material harm, and that is harm that involves actual harm to the environment that may include a leak, a spill, an emission, an escape, or a deposit of a substance, perhaps from a faulty valve. So in determining the merits of this proposal, and in the absence of a contemporary expert report on its biodiversity impacts, I ask you to consider the very real risk of environmental harm to an already vulnerable ecosystem that is a refuge to even more vulnerable, threatened and endangered species, some of which are facing regional and even global extinction. So please consider.
Jackie, before you go, thanks for your presentation.
A bit rushed, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's okay. The main thing that you've done is to flag some concerns that we should be thinking about, and the lack of a biodiversity report doesn't mean that we can't consider biodiversity issues, and quite a few public submissions have been pointing us towards this is something you should be thinking about. And I'd certainly encourage CEN, if you have specific information that would be useful to us, to make a submission that catches that.
I will do so, but can I just note that the part about a BEDA that you don't get from an EIS or any other desktop research is an actual survey and an actual assessment of each endangered species, and that's what's lacking.
Yeah, okay. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Mr. John Steele.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Commissioners, for the opportunity to speak. My background is actually in civil engineering, where I designed power station structures for Raring, wastewater, etc. Then I went into IT, and then I got a PhD in climate change, adapting houses for climate change. And I've done a lot of research for BZE, looking at the renewable transition. Anyway, so look, the main point here is very similar to one of the early speakers. We can't burn any more coal. It's as simple as that if we're trying to keep to 2 degrees for Paris. We committed to that. And if we do, and it was mentioned in the other graph, that the temperatures are increasing alarmingly, and we're heading towards a hothouse Earth. This is quite well-known research. Extreme events are getting more frequent, longer duration and more intense, and this is because there's more energy in the atmosphere, and every degree of heat extra gives you 7% more vapour, therefore extra storms, big storms, on and on and on. Val's Point's not needed, but beyond at all, actually. If you want to just flick quickly to the next slide, and then we'll flick back again. You'll see that this is a projection of the energy required from 2030 or 2025 to 2030, and it's very little when you think about it. It's about the size of Val's Point, 2.5% of NEM. You want to go back to the previous slide. So rooftop solar and large-scale solar is already generating that capacity each year in 2024. So you can see that So the solar alone is actually, and that's with just 4 hours a day, is the same as your 50% capacity on the Vales Point 660 times 2 divided by 2. So, so I'm basically saying that into the future is no longer required each year because solar's taking off. And look, Vales Point Power Station is one of the most polluting of all our power stations, and particularly black coal ones. The reason is Eraring puts one of the best quality air filters on top. And it's a 660 unit. Somehow Vales missed that one. So a lot of 2.5 particulates, and I'm willing to be correct if that's not the case, but a lot of the 2.5 particulates which cause cancer are being, you can see by those graphs that were shown by Merlene, that basically are infiltrating the whole area. So it's generating much fly ash, which needs to be remediated. I know there's plans, but it shouldn't be needed to be. And then the fly ash is at risk of earthquake. They closed down Myuna Bay as soon as the earthquake report came out. Now, these guys are digging under the ash, so, and it can have subsidence. So there's a big problem there. And by the way, 7GI, Global Investment, owns Vales or whatever. It has a very, very poor environmental record globally. In Australia, it has the fish kills at Vales. In the US, at Blackhawk Mines, it's got a pattern of legal and community conflict around its operations. And in the Czech Republic, complaints have been lodged with the EC. Anyway, it's missing a bit down the bottom there, but we've got limits to operation. Look, if this goes ahead, it needs much more stringent requirements. Got it. So I'm wondering if it needs to go past 2028, and you can see from the transition that it isn't. And how can the community be sure that fly ash will be regenerated? But particularly, methane should be monitored. People think that methane is 20 times carbon. That's over 100 years. Methane is like this. Its emissions are huge in the first few years and then drop down to almost nothing. In 20 years, it has an impact of 80 times carbon. Now, that is all. And look, VAM is a possibility for abating methane. And I was at the University of Newcastle. That's where I got my research. I was in the area that actually was experimenting with VAM abatement. And that's a possibility to help, but you really need to monitor it first. We're not monitoring anywhere in the world, anywhere in Australia, methane emissions, and they're incredibly high.
Thank you.
Can I just mention a couple of other minor points that were from before?
I'm concerned that this is about Vales Point Power Station and we're considering the colliery.
Well,
so if you've got something on the colliery, that would be useful.
Well, it also came into Stephen Galilea's approach, so just covering a bit of that. Energy security has been covered by the fact that we've got solar. Jobs in renewable and jobs in the coal-fired mining and all that coal mine. There's a million jobs we did in research for beyond zero emissions. You could take everyone who's unemployed, everyone who's in the coal mine, and you still wouldn't have enough work for renewables. And just finally, that 13% of New South Wales emission assumes methane at 20 years, methane at 100 years instead of 20. It's much more higher. So I think that's what I was trying to cover. Thank you.
Thanks very much. You can see our concern about methane. We understand that one.
Okay, so I can put you onto the researchers in University of Newcastle if you want to follow up with them.
The next speaker is Miss Jackie Mumford from the Nature Conservation Council of New South Wales.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Jackie Mumford. I'm the CEO at the Nature Conservation Council in New South Wales. I'm also a local resident here on Awabakal country in Newcastle, and I want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of this country. Nature Conservation Council is the peak body for grassroots environment and conservation groups around New South Wales. We've got close to 200 member groups, and I want to acknowledge the member groups that are here today, and the volunteers around the lake who've come together to tell the stories and share their experiences of living alongside these polluting pieces of infrastructure. I know that a lot of this work is done, or all of this work is done voluntarily, and collecting stories of health implications takes a toll. So thank you for doing that work. We've at Nature Conservation Council, we've long advocated for a safe climate for New South Wales, both in the interest of protecting nature, but also in the interest of protecting the people of New South Wales. Addressing climate change really matters for nature. Half of New South Wales threatened species are not expected to survive the next 100 years, with climate change as a major driver. And indeed, there are already hundreds of species that are under threat because of climate change, which was a key finding of the State of the Environment report released by the EPA just last year. Obviously, the mining and burning of coal is the key driver of climate change here in New South Wales. And while some steps are being taken to address change in New South Wales, not nearly enough is being done to meet the scale of the issue. I just want to draw your attention to the Net Zero Commission's Coal Mining Spotlight report, which was just released in December. It found that New South Wales is not on track to meet its legislated emissions reduction targets. Continued extensions or expansions of coal mines are not consistent with the Climate Change Net Zero Future Act of 2023 or our international commitments under the Paris Climate Agreement. New South Wales consent authorities, sorry, this is still a recommendation from the Net Zero Commission. The New South Wales consent authorities need to consider greenhouse gas emissions across scopes 1, 2 and 3 and their impacts in all planning decisions. And on-site abatement, especially fugitive emissions, is essential to meet New South Wales emissions targets. And the federal safeguard mechanism has had limited effectiveness in achieving this. So just to go to some of the earlier points, I suppose, that we've heard today around, the extra 2 years, negligible impacts of extending operations, I would just come back to those Net Zero Commission recommendations and say that now the time for approving any new coal extensions in New South Wales has passed. So the Chain Valley project specifically, I think a question was put to Stephen Galilee earlier and he didn't have the answer to hand, but according to the Clean Energy Regulator's latest publicly available emissions reporting, Chain Valley is the most emissions intensive mine in New South Wales based on analysis of production data. There are no meaningful emissions abatement measures in current operations. Vales Point sourcing its coal from other mines, I suppose the drug dealer's defence, if you like, if we don't extend operations at Chain Valley, but instead to argue that Vales Point would simply get its coal from elsewhere, doesn't take into these Scope 1 emissions into consideration sufficiently. Even if you were to factor in emissions from transport, social or environmental impacts off-site, you would still be having less of an impact than you would by extending Chain Valley. Given the time, I'll just skip ahead. It's also been mentioned, the very poor environmental track record at Vales Point, that they've just been found guilty and are due to be sentenced for a mass fish kill in 2022, and that they have enjoyed clean air regulation exemptions under New South Wales law for 12 years at the Vales Point Power Station. And we are quite concerned that this kind of disregard for community concerns this kind of behaviour shows a disregard for community concerns, which have been primarily identified as air pollution, climate change, and impacts on water. So in closing, the Nature Conservation Council strongly opposes this proposal, and we believe that it should be rejected, with coal being sourced from alternate sources for the Vales Point power station for its remaining years of operation. If, however, the Commission does decide to approve the project, we recommend that further interrogation of emissions should really be required prior to any operations, which would include requiring Delta to detail local climate change impacts on the Lake Macquarie area. And I'll leave it there, given the time. Thanks for the opportunity to present.
I do have some questions, but I'm going to wait until Christopher's spoken because I suspect, I don't want to ask you a question that he's about to answer.
Address. Yeah. No worries.
Thank you. The next speaker, also from the Nature Conservation Council, is Mr. Christopher Wright.
Dear Commissioners and everyone gathered, my name is Christopher Wright and I'm an independent consultant appearing today on behalf of the Nature Conservation Council New South Wales. My role was to consider the site level climate impacts, but also how individual approvals interact with energy markets, emissions trajectories, and broader state policy settings. In that context, I would like to address the Commission on three interrelated issues. First, emissions intensity and substitution. Second, the economic interdependence between Chain Valley Colliery and Vales Point Power Station. And third, how this proposal and its limited greenhouse gas mitigation plans interacts with New South Wales climate emissions pathway. Primarily, I have come to the assessment that the Chain Valley Colliery Consolidation project cannot be properly understood in isolation. It operates within a coupled economic and emissions system, and the consequences of the decision extend beyond the mine boundary, particularly in regard to coal supply substitution. In the department and applicant meetings on February 5th and 6th this year, there was acknowledgement that sourcing coal from other New South Wales mines would involve pricing and logistical considerations. At the same time, however, the assessment report and statements today have concluded that alternative coal sourcing would not materially, economically, or emissions-wise change outcomes for Vales Point power stations, but might even increase transportation-related emissions. Not only do those positions sit rather uneasily together, but the relative transportation emissions would pale in comparison to the Scope 1 emissions currently estimated at Chain Valley Colliery if that mine was substituted. If substitution is economically feasible, as implied in the economic assessment and acknowledged in discussion today, then emissions intensity differentials between mines must matter. If substitution is not feasible without substantial disruption, then the economic modelling assumptions require closer scrutiny. The emissions intensity data, however, makes this issue concrete. The CER determined emissions intensity figures across New South Wales coal mines show that Chain Valley Colliery sits among the highest in the state at approximately between 0.5 to 0.6 tonnes of CO2e equivalent per ROM tonne. Many Hunter Vale coal mines operate at a fraction of Chain Valley's emissions intensity, between 0.02 and 0.3 tonnes per ROM tonne. This is not a marginal variation. It is an order of magnitude difference that could have a material emissions benefit if Chain Valley consolidation request was not approved. The elevated intensity at Chain Valley is driven largely by fugitive methane emissions from operational and historical workings. Importantly, these Scope 1 emissions are overwhelmingly methane, not carbon dioxide, as been addressed prior. But critically, projections indicate that Scope 1 emissions during the 2027 to 2029 period are particularly high due to the additional impact of historical workings that are not able to be proactively capped or mitigated while the mine is operating. In that window, Chain Valley's operations could represent some of the highest emissions intensity coal mined in the state and would, under a cost-benefit analysis guidance now utilised by the New South Wales Treasury, represent somewhere between or in excess of $200 million in carbon-related costs. This has two implications. It underscores the importance of proactive actions to secure closure and mitigate the emissions of historical workings. But it also means that continuing extraction through this period carries disproportionate emissions consequences when compared with alternative supply opportunities for Vale Point Power Station. When one compares a mine operating at 0.06 tonnes of carbon dioxide equivalent per ROM tonne with mines operating closer to 0.05 or 0.08 tonnes, the proposition that substitution would not affect emissions becomes difficult to sustain. Even allowing for uncertainty in exact ROM volumes during 2027 to 29 period, historical production over the last 5 years provides some reasonable guide. Substituting supply to lower intensity Hunter Valley mines could reduce Scope 1 emissions by between 300 to 600 kilotons of CO2 equivalent per year, depending on the source. While transport-related Scope 2 emissions may increase modestly, the fugitive methane differential dominates the overall balance. The net effect would be a significant reduction in cumulative emissions. Substitution would therefore not be emissions neutral. In fact, it would be material. Presenting emissions trends across the coal sector, in presenting emissions trends across the coal sector this morning, the New South Wales Minerals Council highlighted that while emissions abatement had reduced 4 million tonnes across the sector, a far greater share of emissions reductions in the sector has come as a result of the closure of emissions-intensive underground coal mines. However, this brings me now to the second question of economic interdependence. Both in the departmental meetings on the 5th and 6th of February, there was a recognition of the commercial linkages between Shane Valley Colliery and Bales Point Power Station. The proponent's economic assessment further illustrates this relationship. On review, however, there is a strong case that Shane Valley and Bales Point are mutually dependent. Shane Valley's revenue stream is materially reliant on Bales Point. Bales Point coal cost structure is materially reliant on Shane Valley. What's more, the pricing assumptions embedded in the proponent's economic assessment are based on 2020 estimates, and market pricing for comparable coal grades has increased significantly since that time. As such, either the proponent has significantly underplayed the relative economic benefit to New South Wales, or Bales Point is getting a pretty good deal for its supply. This is an element that would likely be a key consideration of potential future extensions for Bales Point. As a result, I would consider the interdependent nature of Scope 1 and Scope 3 emissions in relation to this project extension, emissions that are not merely connected by a conveyor belt or ownership, but are economically coupled. Profitability at one facility influence viability at the other. Due to the 42-month minimum statutory closure timeline, Bales Point Station is currently guaranteed to operate until September 2029. The operational horizon overlaps directly with the projected emissions intensity window at Shane Valley between 27 and 29. However, as has been stressed today and publicly by 7 global investments, this may continue until 2033. This raises considerable risk that potential extension of the power station may also lead to future extension requests for Shane Valley. While this is not a direct concern for today's proceedings, it is material to the consideration not just of New South Wales' 2030 emissions reduction targets, which I believe have only been considered against their symbolic 2030 assessment deadline and not in the spirit of state and national policy efforts to reduce not just annual but cumulative emissions from now into the future. While this mine will not move the global emissions needle, it would play a significant role in hindering the spirit of this emissions decline, which is highly sensitive to incremental decisions of this scale. Finally, the mitigation question must be considered in this broader extension context. While incremental methane mitigation measures were considered as part of this application, these measures are understandably constrained by the commercial reality of a short 2-year approval horizon. Large-scale mitigation, especially ventilation air methane abatement systems, require substantial capital investment and multi-year recovery periods. However, international guidance from UNECE indicates that a 5 to 7 year return on investment is considered appropriate for large-scale ventilation air methane projects. This timeline would be shorter for smaller scale projects. However, if operations were genuinely confined to a short horizon, deeper mitigation may indeed be commercially marginal. But if there is reasonable prospect of continuation beyond 2029, particularly given the integrated commercial relationship with Bales Point, the investment horizon changes materially, and I would recommend independent consideration of technical and commercial mitigation potential under longer time horizons. However, considering the limited time horizon of this consolidation proposal, the evidence demonstrates that Shane Valley would effectively provide some of the highest methane-intensive coal in New South Wales, and that these Scope 1 emissions would be materially reduced if alternative lower-intensity supply was sourced instead. For these reasons, while Shane Valley is a critical local employer, this proposal has broader implications than currently characterised. It is not simply a question of continuing an existing activity that will cease in 2029 prior to key emissions reduction deadlines for the state. It is a decision that interacts directly with methane-driven warming in the critical years before 2030, market substitution dynamics, generator viability, and has additional impacts on the state's emissions reduction pathway in the short and potentially longer term. This analysis has been integrated into the written submission that has been presented to this Commission, including supporting graphics and clarification of the emissions intensity comparisons. If the Commission considers that these issues warrant more detailed treatment, I'd be happy to provide supplementary material focused specifically on substitution impacts, methane mitigation, and system-level emissions consequences. Thank you, Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Wright.
Thanks, Christopher, and thanks for your submission. It was one that provoked a lot of thought and discussion amongst the panel. I hadn't seen the substitution information in there. I could have missed it. There's a hell of a lot we've read. But if it's not in there, it would be of value to us to see some of those numbers. I was concentrating on the structure of your argument rather than the numbers, so I didn't write them down. So it would be useful to us to have some of that substitution possibility thinking provided to us.
Absolutely.
Fellow commissioners?
No, thank you.
Okay.
The next speaker is Ms. Sonia Mackay, who I believe is also appearing via video this morning. Good morning, Ms. Mackay. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Wow, we can certainly hear you. And we can see you as well. Can you see us, Ms. Mackay?
Yes.
Okay, that's much better. Thank you.
Oh, no, sorry. No, I can't see you. Sorry, I can just see myself and a slide.
Okay, that's apparently what's meant to happen. So,
Okay.
all right. So thank you very much, Ms. Mackay. If you could go ahead with your presentation.
Okay. So we're here today due to a proposal to extend a mine by 2 years and also increase output along the same terms during that time, and also additional secondary coal extraction for a gassy mine in which methane may have a shorter lifespan, but we've already heard has greater potency in terms of climate change. There have been statements in the actual assessment which indicates that particulate matter 10 and particulate matter 2.5 concentrations are within national standards. But if you look on the slide and you go through, hopefully, I don't know if I've got enough time to keep going.
Yes, you've.
We're looking at point, go before. We're looking at particulate matter 2.5. So we can see from there, this is from a government website, and it indicates that PM 2.5 is produced from the combustion of fossil fuels, which we've heard again today. So go on to the next slide. We also have concerns about nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide, but it's PM 2.5, which I'd like to concern this address with. So if you go on to the next slide. So particulate matter is a big issue, and the actual website, which is a government website, indicates that there is currently no evidence of a threshold below which exposure to particulate matter does not cause any health effects, So we're expecting 2.5 particulate matter to have an effect. And the short-term effects are irritated eyes, nose and throat, worsening asthma, and also lung diseases, including heart attack, including increased hospital admissions, premature death due to respiratory and cardiovascular diseases. Long-term effects: reduced lung function, cardiovascular and respiratory diseases, increased rate of disease progression, reduction in life expectancy. This is the government's own website. The government's own website, not me, the government's. There's also a government report which indicates that there is a convincing evidence from the literature for a link between exposure to particulate matter and adverse health outcomes, linking it to lung cancer and cardiopulmonary mortality. This is serious. This is not small. It's not in the public interest, which you have to consider as a consent authority for the community. One study, which is separate from this, showed higher rates of cancer surrounding Ballast Point coal-fired power station without even pointing to that as a potential issue. So the health effects are really bad, and that these particular health effects we've heard also travel a long distance way down to Wollongong. So it's not even just affecting the area in the Hunter, it's also affecting Sydney and Wollongong. So that is a concern. We've heard about the potential multiplier effects, but that should be seen alongside
Ms.
cost
Mackay,
benefit.
Ms. Mackay, 1 minute, please.
That should be seen as alongside a cost benefit analysis of ill health. I really need more time. It also, in my area, I have a Master of Environmental Law, which specialised in climate change. Now, my concern is the climate change issue as well. There is no plan regarding Scope 3 emissions. We've already been told that there's an admission that it's a concern. It's not minor. We have continued to have the United Nations give us warnings. We have continued to have scientists give us warnings. It doesn't matter if you're potentially in front of a handgun or an AK-45 if you're still going to have fatal issues with it. It doesn't matter.
Ms. Mackay, that's your 5 minutes. I'll just ask the Chair.
Ms. Mackay, the material you're covering's been well covered by other speakers, and your fellow future sooner colleagues have put this on our radar, which is the main thing that we're trying to do today.
There's one or two more points. There's one or two more points though which haven't, and they really need to be.
You should have
talked
started
about.
with those. We can't afford you
5
additional
minutes
time.
isn't enough time. It relates to the industry themselves researching into the climate change impacts, and they actually foresaw what was happening. It's not the community, it's the Exxon and Shell and the physicists from Exxon indicating they're not going to stay beyond 2030. It's not going to be catastrophic.
We would welcome a written submission from you, so please capture those thoughts and whatever information would be relevant and send it in as a written submission.
Because there's also ESD and there's also precautionary and also intergenerational and user.
Miss Mackay, the Chair has made the panel's position clear. I'm going to stop you there, but we do welcome a written submission from you on these topics. Thank you very much. That concludes the registered speakers today on the programme, and that remains for Mr. Cornford to come back up and talk to us, please.
My only comments to the Commission relate to Chair Menzies' question earlier on insights regarding Scope 1 emissions. Look, this is an issue that all underground coal mines are dealing with and have to deal with, and we have to do it proactively. The safeguard mechanism at a federal level is driving compliance towards this, and there's multiple levers, at a state level as well that are driving this as well. Ms. Evans from the department talked about the sealing of legacy areas being a primary control that's appropriate for Chain Valley. Chain Valley and Chain Valley, I include Mannering in that, given that we operated as a single mine. They're two 60-year-old mines. They've mined in 3 seams. There is a lot of legacy workings there, and that is the opportunity for us to improve our Scope 1 emissions. I would say Q2 this year, in terms of sealing legacy areas, we are finishing mining in a certain area, the northern mining area, and Q2 this year we'll be sealing around 150 kilometres of legacy roadway associated with that. There is still more to do in that space, and it is something that we're definitely looking at, because the safeguard mechanism at a federal level is certainly driving us towards those positions.
Joshua, please excuse us, but we are going to break up the chain of your presentation to ask questions as we go through.
All right.
Okay.
It was also, Bronwyn Evans, it was also related to Scope 1 emissions, and it was in the context that you mentioned in your presentation you have a possibility or an option for export of 660,000 tonnes using road transport for export. And I would just be interested to know how, 2 questions really. In the event that that happened, are there facilities available to support that road transport, and what would be the additional abatement measures you would need to take in the event that that was switched on?
Oh, look, I'll have to, as far as Scope 1 emissions go, I'll have to take that on notice, I'm afraid.
Okay.
Back to you, my friend.
No, I just wanted to refer to that. I don't know if I have nothing further to add on any of the other presentations. I think my presentation has made our point as the applicant.
Yeah, so the abatement approach that you've got in mind is primarily through sealing of old workings.
Yeah, I would add, from a technical point of view, there is a lot of work happening in the VAM space. Whether that's suitable for Chain Valley, I question, given the notwithstanding the comments about Chain Valley being a gassy mine, our upcast shaft methane concentrations are very low, and VAM generally needs higher concentrations to work successfully. From a drainage point of view, it is something that we have actively considered. The Fassifern seam has a low permeability, and the gas content of that seam is such that generally other mines that do that pre-drainage drain it down to around the gas content of the Fassifern seam that we're mining in currently. So we don't see a lot of value in terms of reducing emissions through that process, but it is something that we have looked at, and it is something that we'll continue to take into consideration.
If development consent was to be granted, what abatement measures does the company say it will put in place to regularise or reduce the amount of methane exposure? What commitments is the company prepared to offer?
Well, the commitment is the greenhouse gas management plan that, under the draft conditions, we would put in place.
Well, can I just stop there then, just for a moment, because that doesn't actually put forward any commitments. That indicates, at the moment, there's no management plan published as yet, and what it indicates is that you will consider doing things. What I think the panel might be interested in is what commitments. You've heard the questions, you've heard a lot of submissions made about abatement and the fact that, well, the assertion that this is a gassy mine, and the panel may be interested in what commitments the company is actually prepared to make in terms of abatement measures.
The primary mechanism and driver for us to continue to reduce our emissions is continuing to seal legacy areas of the mine, and that is something that the company is going to continue to do as mining progresses.
Can I expand that question slightly to understand what the process then for mine closure and rehabilitation is, whether it's at the end of this current consent or whether it's at the end of any future extension? What's the approach that will be taken by the company then as part of that mine closure and the rehabilitation plan Yeah.
Well, the company will rehabilitate that landform back to its original form. So I can take that on notice with a bit more detail. I think it is included in the EIS and the department's assessment. But if further information beyond that is required, I can take that on notice.
And not just the on-ground facilities. I'm thinking for those, below ground seams. I don't know whether there's options, whether they get flooded or I'm not technical in it, but it'd be good to understand what does that actually mean the day you close and walk away.
From an underground, speaking generally, as underground coal mines close, they're sealed up from the portal into the mine, and that area below the workings underground is allowed to flood or be otherwise abandoned after recovery of equipment and so forth.
Yep.
Okay. All right, Joshua, thank you. We've run out of questions from the panel. I might, just before making my closing statement, just re-stress the point that you have the opportunity to provide us with information, and during the course of the day there have been several people where I flagged to them that I would appreciate specific additional information. So additional submissions before we close, which is soon. Let me just say soon, so you haven't got a lot of time to achieve this. And the other thing that I stressed at the outset, which is please don't assume that we'll reject this. If you want it rejected and you've got ideas that would make it better, have a bet each way. So give us those thoughts as to what could make the conditions that we apply work better. Okay, my closing statement. Thank you. That brings us to the end of this public hearing. Thank you to everyone who presented today for your thoughtful presentations. A transcript of today's proceedings will be made available on our website in the next few days. Here's the information I was looking for a moment ago. Just a reminder that the Commission will accept written submissions on the Chain Valley Colliery Consolidation Project up till 11:59 p.m. Thursday, 26th of February 2026. It's particularly helpful to us if you can comment in your submissions at this stage on the assessment report for this project prepared by the department and the associated recommended conditions. You can submit your comments using the Make a Submission portal on our website or by email or post. Thanks for your company today, and from all of us at the Commission, enjoy your afternoon. Yeah.